Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel.
Howdy, howdy.
So today's episode is part 2 of 20K down the drain. And, well, for now, where the Suburban was, back over there, we pushed it outside because, well, we have too many projects and we need about 100,000 square foot facility to keep them all inside.
Yes.
So today we're working on the short block for this thing. So we're gonna build a complete engine, but right now we're just trying to get the rotating assembly together. And we were gonna film pulling the original motor apart, the red one that has the nasty crosshatching. You can see it's kind of just thrown here haphazardly across the floor because we decided that we were just gonna use that motor as a core. So we're gonna build another motor with it. Steven's got a project to build a 6.2, 6.1, 6.2, I think?
Yeah, 6.2 Chevy.
Yeah. No. 6.2
Not
Cummins.
no, but God, no.
So basically a 40 over bore, 6.7 crank, milled piston, 12 valve motor. So longer stroke, a little bit bigger bore, you end up with a 6.2. And there's been a few people build them. They're a cool little combination. You end up with the kind of the grunt out of a 6.7.
Yeah,
but
well, that was a team that paired up with a rotary pump ought to make massive torque, you know,
and run good. So when he says rotary pump, he means early first gen. So anyway, that's what that block's going to be used for. And so for now, it doesn't even matter because it's going to get punched out. So what we have here is a block that we had. We kept his motor as a core, and this was a motor that we had down there. I think it's a 20 thousandths over bore, right?
40 over.
Is it 40? Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, this is the motor we were going to use for your 6.2.
So I had 40 over pistons and a 6.7 crank. I just hadn't had the machine work done.
Okay. So we have a 40 over 5.9 here. This is going to be a stock 12 valve. So 40 over is more than fine for what we're going to do. This thing might make 400 horsepower one day. So right now we are setting up, basically checking the ring gaps on all the rings and file fitting if they need them. So you're looking for, with this ring package, about 4 thousandths for every inch of bore. So this is a
40 bore times 4 thousandths gives you a little over 16 thousandths of in gap.
So we're gonna
minimum.
Okay, so we're gonna use a feeler gauge. We've set the top ring down into the bore a little bit. Using we got a little tool here from Summit. We've got a mess here.
Cheapo Summit kit.
Little Summit, it sets it down in the hole. Pretty
just
simple.
The right height.
Keeps the ring perfectly flat so that you know you're measuring the gap right. You don't have it kind of all cattywampus or sitting in there crooked where the gap maybe is bigger. So yeah, rings going in. We're gonna check all of them. And our first measurement on the front side is about 19 thousandths.
Yep. So,
which is good. We're looking at a minimum 16 and some change. 16161616 forever, and we've got that. We got 19. So a little bit loose isn't a big deal. Hugely loose, that's a problem. But the factory Cummins spec, we like to go a little bit on the looser side from the factory setup. Nothing wrong with a motor that's a little bit loose, especially if you're going to put a little bit of heat into it. And the reason that most of the time these rings come out of the package, they're exactly what Cummins spec calls for when it's at final hone, but we always hone the cylinders a little bit larger, piston to bore clearance just a touch bigger, so that in the event that you do get it real hot, you don't expand the aluminum piston and drag it inside the bore. That's, for the most part, that's what ruins Cummins motors.
Show them these pistons. See if you can get it on camera.
So these are coated and chamfered, so they've got a coating on the side. You can see the edge of the piston actually has a taper, so that's chamfered. This top edge, if it grows really, really, really hot, it can expand and not touch the cylinder wall up top. So it's a really, really good, it's a Mall performance cast piston.
Yes, sir.
And well, they work really good. You can make a whole lot more than stock power on them. I can tell you that for damn sure.
Yes, sir.
Used them in a bunch of builds. It's a good piston. They had a little bit of a variance, so you can see the numbers are written on the bottom side of each piston. This is what each piston measured. So, you know, a half a thou, a thousandth off between a set, which they didn't used to have that much variance. I feel like just 10 years ago you used to get stuff that was a lot more consistent, but each one of them was labeled for each bore. Actually, you can see number 6, number 5, And so each cylinder has corresponding machine work to match it, which is the only thing that you can do to get your piston to bore clearance exactly where it's supposed to be. So another one of those things that you got to have a good machine shop, have your back. We use Kotzer Racing in San Antonio. Not the fastest machine shop in the world, but these guys do really, really good work, and we've used them for a long time. It's always scares me to try to change to go to a different machine shop because we are trying to get more volume done. So it's just one of the battles. If you've built motors before, you know how it is. Call it machine shop jail.
Yeah, once you find a good machine shop, it's hard to leave the one you got.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with. You can see cross hatching on this is really nice, like it's supposed to be. It's gonna be good. So we've got a bunch of clean parts. We're gonna size everything, get everything super duper clean, put rings on pistons. Right now, Steven already swapped the pistons onto the connecting rods, and the orientation is right. You wanna make sure you have the rod facing the right way. The piston goes a certain orientation. And that's on basically every motor. So yeah, all that stuff is done. Size all the rings, put them on the pistons, put them in the hole, rock and roll. Let's go. Motor back in there. It's a huge step because a lot of this stuff is downhill from here. So basically going to set the engine angle to where it's optimal, and we'll use the back side of the transmission and the T case to kind of hold that. Then we've got to roll the chassis back underneath it, go up and down until we get that dialed in. We had a number before, but because we chopped the other Crossmember out, we're basically starting over from there. Yeah. We got to kind of set everything. So
motor mounts are slotted so this thing can move forward and back to clear firewall.
We've got a little bit of movement available in the motor mounts. Hold on. God, dude, this thing is just not user friendly this time. We've got a little bit of room in these to be able to slot. You can see the bottom side is slotted. You might be able to. That's oblong this way and that, and this is oblong this way and that. So we've got up and down and left and right. We've got some movement on the block side as well. So we should be able to dial this thing in, be able to set an angle finder up here, make sure our frame's sitting level, match the motor to that left and right where that's perfect. And then we'll set it with a couple of degrees of rake towards the rear, and at the same time making sure that we're not diving too hard from the output yoke to the pinion. There's a spot where it's happy medium and you kind of get a little bit of everything, and that's what we're focused on now. And we'll build that transmission / T-case crossmember and be able to move on to, well, I guess everything that we thought we were going to until we pulled the cylinder head and saw that we had bad news bears.
Need to fix the salt or the draft straw that they had going.
Yeah, fuel system stuff is going to be next on the list because, well, if you can't trust any of that, can you trust any of that? I think not. So we're going to check all that out. This exhaust back here, that's going to have to get modified. You know, the thing about a lot of this stuff is that if we work on it, whenever it leaves here, whoever sticks their little head under the hood or crawls underneath it's going to be like, who did the work? Yep. First question. And the guy who owns it isn't going to know between what we did and what the other dude did. So the best thing to do is, well, make it look like that other dude never worked on it, right? Yeah. That can be a pain in the butt, but that's what we've been.
It's part of the nature of it.
That's what we got. So with our flat plate on here, you can set this piece up there, and then you're just reading what the degree is. So we're sitting right at 4 degrees, which that works just fine. So we're gonna take that same plate, go back here to the back, rotate this yoke around on the pinion, and we're gonna measure it and see what it is. And it's a good idea, generally speaking, if if it hasn't been modified by somebody who's a complete dweeb, for the most part, this stuff works out without having to measure everything. But it's also really good to know what degrees your stuff are in the event that you're going to do, I'd say, a double cardan shaft on the back or whatever. There's a different pinion angle that you're going to point the rear diff at to make up the difference for your front U-joints. Now, this is going to be a one-piece shaft. It's just 2 U-joints because we don't have severe driveline angle, and we've got enough length from the back of the output shaft to the front of the pinion. We're not going to need any crazy drive shaft stuff or whack geometry, but it's just a good rule of thumb, in our opinion, to be able to read and see what we've got. So the rear is sitting at about 6, maybe 8. So we're at 3 or 4 at the back here. We're at 8 at the pinion. We're gonna write this stuff down, make adjustments as necessary. You want to, with a leaf spring truck, especially if it's lifted at all, you're going to get some pinion wrap, and you're going to get pinion wrap even when you're just cruising down the road with power applied, because it takes a certain amount of power to keep this thing moving down the road, pushing through the wind. So you typically want your pinion to be a couple degrees negative. That way when you apply power, it may, say, a wide open throttle stomp, this thing may rise 6 or 8 degrees depending on what the leaf springs do. But the kind of rule of thumb for us is to have a couple of degrees negative. That way when this thing comes up into plane, both of these U-joints are both accelerating at the exact same speed. So ideally, if this sits at 4, which it's going to be for all of its life, you want this thing to be sitting at 2 degrees off of that, so that when you apply power, that U-joint and that U-joint are rolling over and canceling each other out, and they have the same acceleration rate front and rear. Now, a couple degrees off between the two, you're never really going to notice, but over the life of a U-joint, that may change one of these 2 U-joints' life by, I don't know, I have no idea what the percentage is, but I do know that if they both accelerate at the exact same speed, that I've done everything that I can to make sure that there's no harmonic vibration in the drivetrain, and all my stuff is set up where I don't feel anything, I don't hear anything, and both U-joints are going to last as long as they can. We've got our stencils. Y'all remember these? For our Crossmember pieces, we've got a couple of them. Well, one anyway, at least for the one side. And we're going to replicate that on the other. Hang on. Dude, this thing is like, this camera wants smashed. So we have this stencil, and we're going to use it for the front and the back. We're going to add a little bit of material to it. But we were plotting where the Crossmember center line is for the mount and everything. And we've got a couple of marks on the frame and where it is. We were really hoping to utilize the pieces of plate that were on this frame already, just to minimize the amount of work and chopping in, sections of the frame that aren't going to be painted any longer. At least not the one color. We can always come back and rattle can it, I guess. But anyway, trying to be as unintrusive as possible and try to use some of this, hoping that the placement of where this was, which is where they had the original trans Crossmember welded, was centered. And the bottom line is it's not. It's off by 1.5 to 2 inches. So we're going to cut this off, both sides. The plan is to punch through the frame, hole saw through the frame, use tube with the right size ID and the right size OD. So we'll punch, say, a 1.5 hole or an inch hole, and use a 1/2 inch ID sleeve with a 1/2 inch ID bolt. And that way you can sandwich the frame together, or clamp to that sleeve rather, and it's in there solid, just like we did up here on this gearbox up front. Because that's the stoutest way of doing it, and we don't want to use just rivet nuts and rely on a riveted nut piece to handle all the shear load of everything that's going to happen when these frame horns start to kind of twist and shear against each other, and they get out of being in a level plane, they start binding and twisting. You want something that's really, really stout, holding that stuff together so that you don't have to worry about having cracked welds or making loud popping noises if you're on the trail flexing this thing out, or whatever you may be doing. So first things first for this, cutoff wheel, and mainly just a cutoff wheel is where we're at. So we're going to chop down the edge of the welds, pop those plates off, and get a game plan together for what we're going to do moving forward. We're thinking that we're going to use a piece of, we're going to fabricate some stuff, probably at a 1/4 inch plate that is like a channel that goes around the frame, allow the sleeve to sit in the middle of it where that clamps to it and it's nice and stout. And then we don't have to use a whole bunch of fasteners to do that, to make sure that this thing's not going to pop and groan and you know, be moving around whenever we want to rock and roll. So anyway, chopping this trash out, and we'll be right back. Using this is you can see that this is a 1/2 inch diameter, well, mainly because it's written on there, but you use this whenever you drill a certain size hole, and this gives you a perfectly centered little dimple for where your pilot hole is going to be in the instance that you have a large diameter hole that you need to center. So that bushing fits in there perfect, and that little nipple makes a perfect little indentation. So all 4 of these 1/2 inch holes have nice centered up drill pilot. I can't think this morning, bro. Has nice little dimples for your drill bit to start drilling.
Yeah.
That's as good as you're gonna get out of me this early in the mañana, brother. All right, so we have our first setup knocked out. So we've got the frame sleeved all the way through both sides. This plate is bolted on this side, and we had originally, the plan was to just sleeve this and tie our bracket into the inside, and we were just going to use the inside edge and then drill on the bottom side, but we didn't want to cut holes in the frame for access points for the 2 nuts that we're going to hold from the bottom on basically a piece of angle iron to grab the frame. So we just went ahead and came around the outside and boxed it all the way up. That way this thing can't wiggle any direction. We don't have any fasteners from the bottom, and we didn't want to use rivet nuts because, well, we wanted something that was unbreakable. So we ended up with these saddles that bolt up. They're made out of 1/4 inch, and they slide up the frame just like that, and the bolts pass through there, and the whole crossmember will slide straight down just like that on both sides. And well, it's not going to move around, is it?
No. It's all there.
So that's what we're doing, and now we're going to move on to using our templates to cut out the couple pieces of flat plate that are going to basically mimic this front crossmember design. All right, so we have our first piece cut and laid up in here. Looks like Logan's got it ground down pretty good. Let me flip this around and show you. Booyah! See how that's sitting up there? Grabbed a little bit of the bottom, a lot of the bottom actually, because we extended that piece off. That's going to weld up vertical there. And still got some room up here if we had to tie in for some additionals. And then this back piece, you can see that that's coped around the mount, looking solid all the way across. We have this nice clean radius that's here for where that double cardan joint is going to come off of the front drive shaft. See how clean we looking? Baller. Everything looks good. We're just a little bit thin where this radius is right here. A little thinner than I think what we'd like. So we went out to the scrap pile, and there's a piece of 1/2 inch bar that's out there, and I'm thinking, if you're down with it, brother, that we might just have to heat us up and bend us a little 1/2 inch bar for where this gets thin, where our double cardan is. So anyway, we're kind of brainstorming a little bit, but we want to make sure that this stuff is super stout. We talked about adding some additional plate off the top side here. The main, oh my God, man. Dude, is this real life? Kind sir, let me help you. So you've just arrived at the UPS packing facility. Everything's okay.
Okay.
I need you to go ahead and get in this box. We're gonna do what's called face down, rump up, and that's
I don't wanna.
Listen,
No, I don't wanna.
That's the only way we ship.
I'm so sorry, I'm in the wrong spot.
Oh my God. Dude. Bro, listen. Mental health awareness, okay? If you see somebody who acts like my brother, first off, give them a hug unless they look rabid and they're foaming at the mouth. And then find someone to help them, all right? Because poor little guy, he's just, you know, rubber band wound up too tight or something in there. So before we were so rudely interrupted by this mental health guy, my brother, I wanted to explain something. We're trying to use material that we have here as well. If we had like a CNC plasma or a laser table thing that cut perfect everything out and like
That would be really nice.
Yeah, that's a dream in the sky, pie in the sky for us right now. But we had 6-inch wide by quarter material, and the whole reason that we ended up stopping where we did up here instead of running all the way to the top of the edge is because, well, from that long edge of that cut to the bottom of there is 6 inches. So we're thinking that we're going to add some additional material from here down and try to just make it look clean. We'll end up with a weld seam that's here, and we're really picky because we want it to look good, but we're also working within the confines of what we have, and you know, trying to make sure that the stuff's as stout as it can be. So we're going to use some of the material. We didn't end up just having 2 foot of this 1/2-inch bar. I think there's a whole stick of that half out there, so we can run wild with that if we need to, and add some additional gusset stuff onto this, because this is heavy and we don't have it to have a problem ever. So anyway, we're gonna figure something out, and then we're gonna weld it together, and then we're gonna look at it some more, and then we're gonna talk about it on camera.
Lots of that.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we got a Crossmember over here, and we're getting ready to move on to the fuel tank. Let me show you how this turned out. So we decided that we're going to clip the top 2 holes off of this thing. It was just made it a lot easier for sliding this into place, because then you've only got about 2 inches that has to key in perfect on both sides, and it's just easier for installing and removing the Crossmember. We still have these sleeved all the way through, so we've got 4 bolts on either side, bolted all the way through, nice and solid, and sleeve through the frame. That thing is as rigid as it could ever be. And we were talking about this before, last time we were over here. I was telling y'all I had some 1/2-inch bar we were maybe gonna bend to try to stiffen up this piece. Well, we decided that the best way about going about this, after Steven and I and Logan were looking at it, was like, hey, why don't we just add a 3rd brace in the middle of this that follows the same profile as these other 2, and now you've got, you know, between the thickness of each one of these, this is about 1 1/4 tall, this is about 1 1/8, and this is about 1 inch. So, you know, imagine a piece of 1/4-inch plate, 3.5 inches tall. You've got something that's now really rigid on a strong edge. And dude, it looks great. The profile is awesome. It matches all the way. It's going to clear that double cardon. And Logan went ahead and welded that completely out. And you can see in the middle here where he drilled some holes and plug welded that, because we couldn't get the stinger in there for the MIG welder to weld the sides of it like these other ones are. You couldn't get down in this angle to get a decent weld. So plug welding it was the best way. And then there's some spots where you could grab, when it was out on the bench, you could actually grab onto it pretty good. So that thing's been welded out. This is all boxed in the middle. We've got the trans mount sitting in it, and all the weight is on that Crossmember now, and it looks good. Let me see if I can get down here where we can see the whole thing a little bit better. You know, boom shakalaka. So that one looks really similar in design to the front. So they, you know, look like they were kind of belong together. So that is all done except for some painting and maybe some little cosmetic, little detail stuff. But we're done there. We've got our motor sitting at about 3.5 degrees. So we're happy with that. Again, we checked pinion angle, output shaft angle. We're trying to set this up where our U-joints are both canceling each other out at the same degrees. That's something you always want to consider when you're doing it. So we put everything as close as we could to perfect. And, well, that's as good as what the OE did or better. So we're going to rock and roll with that. Now, we move back here to the next problem.
Yeah.
We got some goofy stuff. We should call this making chicken salad out of chicken.
Shit. I can't say that.
No.
Can't say
Chicken
that.
poop.
Chicken poop. Poop. Huh?
Chicken salad out of chicken poop. That's Twelver's nickname, chicken. We'll get into that one day, but it's because he's scared. You can see here we got a draw straw, and it's not it's not, draw straws aren't the worst if they're cut right, and the bottom of this tank is pleated and they've got it set decent here, but the biggest problem is well, it's at the front left corner of a tank. And if all it did was set and idle on a flat parking lot,
Perfectly flat.
yeah, it never drove or accelerated or braked hard or turned real hard left or right or pulled up an incline, well, they would be fine. But as soon as you go to give this thing any real throttle, all the fuel's going to slosh to the back. And even if that thing only sucks air for a second, that air bubble is going to make its way, and the fast is going to do everything it can to remove the air. But what you're going to end up with is a pressure loss in the line, and it's going to stumble. It's going to run bad. And let's say that you just stomp the throttle to get out into traffic, and you're in Colorado. So you stomp and pull out and turn up a hill. Well, guess what, buddy? You're in bad shape. Now you're pulling over maybe on a skinny shoulder on the $1 million highway, hoping to God that the 18-wheeler who's stabbing the brakes doesn't knock you off the edge.
Yep.
So anyway, that's definitely worst case scenario, but it could also be you pull up to Grandmammy's and you're checking the mail and her driveway is like this, and now you're dead in water. So you don't want to deal with that for a multitude of reasons, and so for that we can't leave that. You can't do it. So we've got I think we have a decent game plan here. We're going to try to adapt kind of what's here and add just a couple of things to make it right. So if you look down inside here, it's got a basket in the middle that is designed to hold fuel in a centralized location so that all the other fuel around it can slosh around, and the basket stays at a as full as possible, so that the fuel pump, even in original when it was a small block Chevy or whatever that was in this thing, didn't lose prime. And our plan is to take the vent hose that is large. This is 5/8 diameter, which is good because the suction line for this fast, because it's a P-pump truck, it runs a large 5/8 suction line. This bib ends up being 5/8 as well. So we're going to tie into this for our suction, which puts our sending unit really close to centralized location. And the reason it doesn't have to be absolutely center is because you have that basket down in the bottom. And that's going to hold a decent amount of fuel and allow that to recover between heavy sloshing and hill inclines and stuff like that. So it's really close to the center of the tank. We're going to let that ride. We're going to set our hose in there where we can try to just deviate it a little bit, to try to stay dead center, just because that's what you're shooting for always. That's your, and as far as perfection, that would be perfect. So we're looking for dead center of that. And then we're going to take this 5/8 fitting, one of these two. I think we're going to swap this piece to this side and use that as the vent that runs up to the vent, so that when you go to put diesel in it, it doesn't stack up the inside of this with foam and click your nozzle off the whole time. So that's an important piece as well, and it allows the tank to expand and contract a little bit, which you're not really dealing with vapor expansion like you are in a gas engine in a tank. It's mainly about being able to pull up and put some diesel in it and not sit there and click off 1,000 times. You have to flip the nozzle up and do it just right and hold your mouth just right while you do it to be able to put diesel in it. So,
and then we'll return through this.
Yes.
That way we don't have a random hole cut in the tank.
Exactly. Since the hole's already there in this steel tank, we're going to leave this piece here. And on the bottom side of this, it has one large nipple that goes down that's for the suction. And then off center of that, on the bottom, imagine a large hole in the middle, and there's a little bitty 1/4 or 5/16 hole that's been machined right into the side of this. Well, that's to return on into the top side of the tank. We're going to use that as our vent, and we're going to use the 5/8 return, the straw, as our return from our regulated fuel system. So hope that's clear as mud, but the bottom line is we're going to use what we have, and I think we're going to be able to adapt everything and make this work. Yeah, we're going to try to get rid of some of this here. I mean, if you're going to go dumb, at least make it one color.
At least one color.
Where you don't just see what's wrong. Look at that. Come on. Get you some of that.
We were headed there.
Don't cut that off and slide that off there. You leave that there to rattle around.
But yeah, I mean, that little lip there keeps that hose on there, keeps it from leaking.
Yeah. Yeah, because we ain't got a flare tool to fix that there.
No.
God bless these folks. Okay, guys, so we are working on the steering here this morning, and we're going to do a crossover, not a high steer, but a crossover kit, and I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what that involves. So if you look at this knuckle on this side, this guy right here, you can see that it doesn't have any provision for an attachment for any steering other than this piece right here, which is a tie rod on the center link that comes from this side. And this has got a push-pull style drag link. And this doesn't work well when you have lots of suspension travel, because the more that thing scrubs, the more bump steer you get, meaning that if this moves up a whole lot, let's say that it's at an angle like this, as it moves up, the distance between the two has to get greater because of the angle, and that pushes on the pitman arm, which makes the steering wheel turn every time you hit a bump. So this is going to be our fix for that, and it allows us to run the two-wheel drive box that has a bolt-on pitman arm with a nut instead of this, which is a pinch bolt style. This is the original one. So we're actually going to pull that guy off, put this pitman arm on, and then we'll have a tie rod that attaches here on this end. Got some nice DOM that's threaded, so no weld bung on this side. Legit little kit here. So this piece will thread into this. That tie rod attaches to the pitman arm. That runs across over the top side of the leaf springs, and it runs across to this knuckle. This is from Reed Racing, and it's just a new casting that's been machined. Back in the day, you would buy Wagoneer knuckles, or you would machine your, what you had and try to make something work with this. But this is a brand new piece, so got a 6-bolt set up for a GM spindle. You press your ball joints in, bolt your spindle and all your stuff up, and then you have this machined flat top piece that receives this piece. And this is your billet steel piece that is going to bolt onto the top side of that. It looks all cool. Then you have a tie rod that attaches here on the other end of this piece, and all your steering stuff is up above the leaf springs, and you don't have to worry about bump steer, like hardly really at all, unless you got some serious travel. But on a leaf spring, factory leaf spring front axle, I don't think we're going to have any issue whatsoever. So Logan's going to dive into that kit. He's got everything unboxed here. About to pull this tire, get this all disassembled, backing plate, spindle, brakes, all that stuff, and then we'll put this thing together and show y'all what that looks like when it's done. We're battling a couple things. The first of which is the exhaust. So hang on, camera's going dumb. There we are. So the exhaust doesn't have a whole lot of clearance, at all, and this downpipe is just horrendous. There was some header wrap that was wrapped around this, but look at the number of connections that happen right here in less than a foot. You get the V-band on the back of this, because this is like a Marmon flange. So you get a Marmon flange to a second gen ball and socket adapter, which would work, because this is a second gen drop-in turbo. This would have worked with a factory second gen downpipe. So this isn't terrible, but then 1.5 inches past that, we now got a V-band. So I've got 3 connections right here. And I guess it allows for adjustability. I can rotate on that axis. This thing can move a little bit, but it just looks absolutely terrible, and it leaves a lot of places for it to leak. You can also see that it comes out of this piece, does over a 100 and something degree bend to get back to here. So I'm certain that if it's pie cut like the rest of this trash that's on here, I'm sure doesn't flow very well.
Then you've got a hard 90.
You got a really hard 90 down here, and I mean rock hard.
Yeah, hard.
And it's probably done out of pie cuts and stuff, and it's not really going to matter, because this thing isn't making a lot of horsepower. Like, this is probably 350 horse when we get it tuned and dialed in, but it just looks terrible, and there's no real flow to it. And I know that if you pop the hood, the first thing you're going to look at is the 75 stainless zip ties and the header wrap. This is what everybody does. You header wrap for 2 reasons, right? You either build it nice and you're depressed about headering wrapping it because no one gets to see the work you did, and you wrap it up, and then when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's clean and mandrel and nice. Like, I bet that looks nice under there. Or you do a really terrible job.
You can tell.
Yeah, and then you can tell. And, it even comes down to like your stainless zip tie game. The trick here is to put as few of those as possible, and to make it look as clean as possible. And there's 100 of them in 6 foot. So it's just not right, and it's not what we want to look at, and it's not what we want to hang our hat on. So we're trying to find the most cost-effective way to utilize some of the stuff that's here, like the V-band piece that's here. Both sides of that are usable. We can cut that off and use it. We can probably use this clamp that's up here, even though it's like a Chinesium version of the right flange V-band. I think we can make that work. But like these other V-bands and stuff that are down here, we can utilize some of that. But then you've also got, like, this pipe just runs straight it has less than a finger's worth of clearance underneath there. And I think these dudes thought, well, we'll just make it really, really rigid, and then it won't matter what kind of clearance you have. And that's partly right, but when you make something really rigid like that all the way up to the downpipe, you risk breaking the flange at the back of the turbo or any of the other joints in the middle. And like where these V-bands are, you're either going to get some index that happens as the motor torques on more than one clamp, or you're going to get a weld that breaks. And it just puts everything in a bind. It's harder on the engine, it's harder on the turbo, it's harder on the exhaust, and something ends up giving, and maybe it's one of the cheesy clamps or the exhaust hangers, and that bends, and now that's touching the transfer case the entire time. You know, and or whatever number of ways you can be screwed by building exhaust like that. We've learned over the years that there's a few ways to do it. You want to make certain portions of it really rigid, and then you want to be able to give it some movement in between. And for the most part, if you come from the downpipe and you make the downpipe part really rigid to the engine up front, you don't have to worry about stuff working its way loose at the back of the turbo, leaking exhaust, undue stress on anything. Basically down to the bell housing, you make that rock solid. And then from there, you install a bellow that allows a little bit of movement in all directions so that you can build the rest of this back here fairly rigid as well. And you're just trying to make sure that as the frame twists and moves, that you've got a point in there for some stuff to have a little bit of movement without contacting stuff, but also not breaking all your welds off in the downpipe, or every time you put it in reverse, you get this really bad harmonic through the entire driveline because it's got poly cab mounts, it's got poly motor mounts. It's going to talk a little bit. And so the more rigid you make all the pieces around it, the worse all that stuff's going to get, and something's eventually going to give. And we're trying to prevent any of that stuff coming back, because it's 10 times as much work to fix an exhaust that's bad once the cab is down and you're done than it is to spend those few hours, you know, now when you've got a little bit of room to make that thing have plenty of clearance, keeping in mind sections that you need to be able to remove to get the transmission out or to work on certain stuff. The other thing is just like the front Crossmember was going to interfere with the axle, this back piece back here, it may not ever interfere because there's a decent bit of compression. There's probably about 10 inches from the tube up to this exhaust. But there's a couple things about this that suck. One, it looks terrible. You're never going to get away from the fact that you can see right into that fender well at that exhaust, and seeing that it's completely flat makes it look like the guy who was building it was just lazy. More focused on trying to do weld porn miters and stuff, which, you know, some of this is goofy, like where you make a straight piece out of a bunch of cuts right here. Like this is all just like, that's a 45, that's a 45, that's a 45, that's a 45. None of that makes any different index. It's just welded together. And I think there's a certain point where that gets really silly, and it's completely unnecessary. It makes for a lot of weld time to put the thing together, and it's really for no reason. And it looks terrible when you look in the fender well, you know. So we're going to address that, bring the exhaust in, and kind of follow the frame and stuff. We use Vibrant for the UJ bends. I know there's a bunch of different tubing companies that are out there, but we're really familiar with the Vibrant stuff, and it works really well. And the UJs work awesome for fabricating stuff. So they call it a UJ because, well, it's shaped kind of like a J, and then it's also got a U in there. So you end up with a 180-degree bend, which means you can cut this into all different increments. You end up with this 45-degree bend, so you've got a 22.5 on either side, or however you want to cut it. But for the most part, you can build a lot of good intercooler piping and exhaust utilizing the stuff that these guys have right out of the box. We had some of the coolant stuff we're going to use under the hood. I'll show you this real quick. So this is the straight sections of aluminum tube and that we're going to use underneath the hood for the radiator stuff. Like coming across here out of this guy right here across the motor, we're going to do a rubber 90, and that's going to connect to the thermostat outlet right there. Put a bead roll in it, that'll come across, and we'll transition that into the radiator. Just some nice stuff that's going to look good under the hood, matches the rest of the stuff, and it's going to be clean. And it all came from Vibrant, including the silicone hoses and stuff like that. We've had really good luck with them, and their stuff performs and seems to work really well for everything we've ever used it for. So the other thing we bought was a 3-inch bellow, same one that's on the ranch tang actually. And what this thing does is allows the exhaust to move independently of the downpipe. So you can see that we've been fabbing on the downpipe. We ended up leaving the Marmon flange adapter to the ball tube adapter that goes to a second generation style downpipe, and that allowed us to maneuver this a little bit. Well, I was gonna say so we could clear the HVAC box, but
That was.
what
I don't wanna
happened?
Talk about that.
What had happened
I don't wanna
was
talk about
we set the cab down on it and crunched it a little bit in there, but it's all good. Yeah, anybody could have done that. But anyway, this allows us to, what we found was we could rotate this and then rotate index this piece also, and that gave us the most functionality for being able to make the downpipe transition like we wanted to, because it was actually tighter than we figured it was going to be. And we don't have a Marmon flange here, plus that's 4.5 inches almost, and we can only really clear a 3-inch downpipe. The motor's only going to make maybe 350 horse, so you don't need any more than that. And so we're rolling with this because of the clearance issues that happen. Like, you can see the interference that's happening here between the transfer case and this pipe, and we've already got a little jog on it. So anyway, the point is that 3-inch was going to give us the most room. It's going to give us plenty of flow for what we need, and we were able to reuse this piece. And 3-inch is really affordable. They make bellows out of 3-inch, and I was going to show you this. You can see this will move independently of that pipe. So that allows all the exhaust that's at the back of the truck back here shaking and wiggling with the frame as it twists and you go through bumps and off-road to move independent of the downpipe. So the downpipe itself, this is because the manifold, turbo, and downpipe are all fixed right here. What we try to do always is to come up with something really strong to attach. Most of your OEs will attach right here at the bell housing, and that allows this piece and all this stuff to move as one entire unit, and that's really good for several reasons. One, for exhaust leaks. Two, for stress against the backside of the turbo, on the manifold, etc. And so that's what we've known and works. So that's what we're going to continue to do. So we got a mount to make here, then that thing will be rock solid, and then everything past that will be able to wiggle while she works, kind of thing. And vice versa.
Engine vibration out of the rest of the exhaust.
Exactly. And like Logan was just saying, when you get the engine torquing up here between the engine and trans having some movement, you can isolate a whole lot of that right here. Not like inches, but small movements without having to worry about ripping the hangers loose on the exhaust or vice versa. It allows for a lot less transfer of stuff coming back through the cab. If you've ever built a rigid exhaust on a Cummins truck, you know that it makes noise in the cab.
It vibrates.
It just does. And that's because it's completely solid, and you have like a giant tuning fork that is attached to the engine, and that little vibration at the front is making everything jiggle like this, and you end up feeling it in the truck and the cab mounts and all that, and it sucks. It just changes the way that the thing feels when you drive it. So that's where that's at, and we're going to make our way back. And we were just talking about what we're going to do back here on this Crossmember, because typically your exhaust would come up and it would kind of hide behind this. And right now this Crossmember that's absolutely really unnecessary is kind of blocking us from what we want to do. So I think we're going to cope that thing out and put a piece of pipe in it, like somewhere in there area, just to get it up in there where it's got a nice revealer on it where it can never rattle, but the exhaust can make its way through, and it's not going to do anything about weakening this. It's got a Crossmember in front of the fuel tank. There's one that's at the back of the tank. There's one immediately in front of it that actually ties down to the bottom side of the frame as well. So we're not going to be loosening or weakening any of the structural integrity of it by being able to make our exhaust look clean, where when you walk by, like I originally had said, and that all that other exhaust was hanging out, you don't want that. Well, you might want that, but we don't want that. All right, here it is. Solid hanger, double hanger, single hanger, double hanger, single hanger. So for right now, the exhaust is complete, minus the tailpipe, which we'll do when the bumper goes on. We're moving our way through the fuel system stuff, making leaps and bounds on a lot of that. So it won't be too far from right now, and we'll be ready to set the cab back down. So we got some stuff to paint, and well, we got a bunch of stuff to do. We're gonna pull the exhaust off and fully weld all the joints now that we know everything is where it goes, and then we'll put that back on. Maybe paint some of our stuff, measure drive shafts, finish our fuel system stuff, and set the cab down. So actually, I think that's probably the conclusion of this episode of 20 grand down the drain. Yeah. Hope y'all enjoyed it. We'll be back here soon. Be working on intercooler piping, AC stuff, putting the cab down, starting to make the gauges work, and keep rocking and rolling. Hope y'all enjoyed it. See you next time. Later.